All right, so let's jam. Um, so thanks everyone obviously to Mona and the Melonport team for having me. Spent probably most of the last 6 years just jamming with teams on their crypto economic design and how to drive incentivization and network effects on some of these peer-to-peer networks. And I guess I'd like to preface this chat with one observation over the last number of years doing these jam sessions, in that we don't have all the right answers as of today. So, it's totally fine if there are some unknowns or if there are some things that are still to be sort of sussed out and ironed out over time. And, it's a lot of fun to just debate and figure out, some solutions to these problems. And so away we'll go. So I would like to start with just kind of an overview of your idea of Melonomics generally, and then we'll kind of dive in deeper.
Sure. So there's two real parts to the tokenomics around the Melon token. The first part is, most of you will know that a few weeks ago we announced that there will be a fixed amount of inflation that is created each year, starting after the launch, and this amount of tokens will be 300,000 fixed, so it's disinflationary and falling in percentage terms quite steeply over the next few years. And this will be used to fund future development and maintenance of the protocol. And the way that distribution will take place is a fixed amount of that pool of 300,000 will go to the maintainers, i.e. the Melon Council, which we will be unveiling tomorrow morning. And the rest of it, the majority of it, the 80%, will be an available pool of tokens, which is there for developers or projects building innovative applications on top of Melon to apply for grants to the Melon Council in order to complete interesting projects, or just to complete MIPs, Melon improvement proposals from our GitHub repository and apply to the council for those grants. So that's the first part of the Melonomics. The second part I'm particularly excited about, I think, is basically what Travis briefly mentioned this morning, a buy and burn model for ADAPT protocol, which I think is pretty unique for ADAPT protocol. So the way we have designed this use case is that when you're calling certain functions on the Melon protocol, and specifically there are only two of which would be called by the manager, and one which would be called by potential investors, you will get charged asset management gas based on computational units consumed times the price of Melon gas. Now, we wanted to abstract away any kind of user difficulties, because we start to think it gets a little bit cumbersome to have lots of different tokens in your wallet to interact with lots of different protocols. So what we did was we decided that the gas will be charged in ETH terms in the first instance. It will be sent to a Melon Engine smart contract. The Melon Engine smart contract will be a one-way unidirectional market, which will be placing bids for Melon, or basically bidding for Melon, with a step function going up. The more ETH that are created, the higher the premium for Melon, which should bring in arbitrageurs. As soon as the Melon are acquired, they are burned. So essentially you have a sink model, which reduces supply directly in line with demand, or sorry, usage of the network. And you have somewhat of a cap on velocity, because those tokens are then removed completely from circulation, which then prevents them from being recycled into the system, putting a cap on V. And if you're a believer in the velocity equation, which we are, it is an identity, then you essentially manage to link the purchasing power of the token to the usage of the network.
Cool. So sometimes I like to separate a network between its user layer and what I call its keeper layer, which is sort of the underlying utility actors that provide a valuable service or specific behavior to the network. would it be correct to characterize the user layer as, say, fund managers? Those are the effective users of the network. And then the keeper layer is mostly software developers and to a lesser extent the council?
Yeah, I mean, the council you can think of as the maintainers, and then the developers are, yeah, so that would be the keepers, I would say. There is one other type of user that you didn't mention. So the fund managers setting up funds on Melon is correct, but there's also the investors that invest in those funds. I would count those as users as well.
Mm-hmm. And so if we have a fixed supply of inflation to incentivize the keeper layer, these software developers, but then the gas units, the asset management gas units, will obviously become more expensive over time. How do you balance the risk of that not being high enough at the start, such that you have excessive inflation, and then if you have excessive inflation, you could have a drop in price, and you could have actually a spiraling effect there, where the incentivization to the software developers isn't enough for them to keep the lights on and keep developing software.
Right. I mean, just to be clear, we don't expect the burn rate to be higher than the fixed inflation rate in the first few years, and we almost kind of don't want it to be the case as well, because we hope to see a slow and sensible adoption of the protocol. All of these protocols, like you rightly said at the beginning, are still very new, experimental, and need to be handled with care. We're definitely not advocating for a DAO 2.0 to go online immediately. We want to see sensible user testing and adoption. But over time, you're right, as usage picks up, the AMGU price, i.e. Melon's purchasing power against ETH will go up, and as long as ETH is going up in dollar terms as well, this will increase cost to the user. We've tried to start with a very, very low starting gas price, so low that users will hopefully almost not feel it. And certainly anyone who's incurred the fees of setting up and managing a fund in the traditional world will definitely not feel it in comparison. And that's really like the basis of what we're doing. We're coming from, I hope that came across in the introduction this morning, we're coming from a world where it's so expensive to set up and manage a fund today. The barriers to entry are incredibly high. You need $100 million in AUM to survive, in most cases, past the first year. And therefore, we're now talking of bringing that down to a couple of minutes in terms of user experience and a few dollars or cents, depending, for a one-off or two-off functions that you will be charged off. So trading is completely free. So to answer your question in two parts, so there's this initial cost, which we start off very low, and then by our very basic modeling, it would have to move substantially, like the exchange rates would have to move substantially high, or usage on the network had have to spike very, very suddenly for the Melon Council not to be able to react fast enough to adjust the network parameters. But that's also why we decided to keep the network parameters flexible, because the ultimate goal is to keep prices low to the user. And by having this adjustable parameter, the Melon Council can decide to lower the AMGU price if it's deemed that it's getting too expensive for users.
So why not just have a straight fee, and then it's really transparent, and then fund managers know exactly what their costs will be, and it's just a fixed fee on the network, rather than the token buy and burn, which has sort of this variability associated with monetary and fiscal policy on the network?
I mean, the idea of we do have a fee. It is a fee-bearing network, but the fee is only charged, like I said, on 2 or 3 functions. The burn is there to provide a sink. We hope that most of the development will be necessary in the first few years, but as time goes by, less and less development will be necessary, and then it will just be a matter of maintaining. So, hence the disinflationary nature of the fixed inflation will have been sufficient. So it needs to be quite high in the early years and then kind of tailing off by year 10. And this hopefully, you know, if we if we've put the right incentives in place and attract the right kind of council, the right kind of developers, the right kind of users, then, you know, hopefully this kind of.
So would you say that the way that a fund manager should look at it is, say, owning a threshold amount of Melon tokens and keeping just a pocket of that to be able to run and operate their funds, is somewhat similar to, say, owning a seat at the NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange, except for that seat goes towards paying for the software of running the exchange over time directly by paying the software developers for that?
Yeah, no, in our case, I wouldn't say that's the case because we've tried to abstract the need or requirement for hedge fund managers to require holding Melon full stop. Now, there is a reason that they might want to hold Melon, and that would be out of fear that Melon purchasing power will appreciate much faster than Ethereum price. And so, so they would want to be hedged.
Kind of what I'm getting at.
We don't force it, and we hope that the fees are low enough to start that they wouldn't have to do that unless they really fear that outcome. But it does, it is a possibility that they would want to hold a small portion of Melon or their estimated fee amount in Melon, exactly, so that they hedge against the risk of Melon ETH appreciating.
The same way that they would hold, say, a seat at the New York Stock Exchange to hedge against the risk of that going up in price. So let's dive a little bit further into an amazing phenomenon that we've seen in crypto economics unfolding, certainly in the last year, which I think a lot of us would not have predicted. And that is this sort of psychological mob effect that occurs where there is certain pricing of specific assets or certain sort of actions among a group of users that isn't necessarily totally efficient. So, for example, what we've seen with buy and burn in MKR is that there hasn't been a corresponding price increase to basically equate to what would have been a dividend. So the buy and burn is actually a great way to get around a dividend, which then makes your token an obvious security. So instead you do the buy and burn, and the deflation should raise the price of that token thusly, and you effectively transfer value to the token holder without directly giving them tokens or other value. However, we haven't seen this really play out in practice. Is that observation a concern for you with respect to the buy and burn, or do you think that this is just really early days and the market will reach a point of efficiency where buy and burn does translate to corresponding value, and it is an appropriate way to sort of retransfer value back to token holders?
I mean, I think in general, if the main use for the Melon token is the buy and the Melon engine, then the model should work. Now, if you start to get excessive speculation or people using Melon for other purposes like buying and selling, I don't know, jeans or TVs or whatever, then yes, of course, there are market factors in play that we had not considered. We have always thought of our token as a utility token. We've always designed it as a utility token. And therefore, we assume that people have better and more liquid currencies to do their shopping in than Melon. But obviously, when we're building an asset management network, it would be unrealistic to assume that our team of 12 can complete all of that in 2 years. We've, I think, put in place a pretty good beginning infrastructure. But I think that this is probably at least 5 to 10 years more of work that needs to be incentivized. So being able to issue your own token to incentivize that future development is a very powerful tool, one that we're very blessed to have thanks to blockchain technology. And basically being able to link the usage of the network, i.e. basically kind of link the success rate of the network to the quality of that development is very powerful as well, because hopefully it brings in some of the best talent pools and encourages a lot of the right projects to build on top of the protocol.
And so actually you bring up a really interesting point, which was one of the things that I thought about as I went through the updated crypto economic model, that because effectively the keeper layer is software developers building valuable apps on the network, do you think that this could actually extend beyond asset management, and maybe the cool use case of Melonport is software of a totally different kind?
Yeah, totally. I mean, to be honest, I mean, when we first set out, the two obvious, I mean, the obvious use cases I saw after hedge funds was like insurance, VC, pension fund, etc. But actually, when you look at the first use cases that people have actually started building, they were use cases I think most people on my team never imagined. So Midas Technologies building Ash, this gamification use case for fund management, battle of the managers. Like I would never have seen that coming, but I think it's really cool. Like I can totally see people in the city getting stuck into that and having a laugh with that. And I see, Dylan mentioned in his talk this morning the idea of tokenizing deposits. I mean, that could mean that Melon is something that could be used for banking too, if you think about it. So yeah, I mean, it's taking a direction. It's already taken two directions, in terms of ideas and actions that I hadn't expected, and I'd expect more of that, and I hope to see more of that. And I think if you look at the core designs of our governance and Melonomics, one of the things we really hope to encourage is innovation, and new financial ways of doing things beyond hedge funds. We have focused on hedge funds and asset management, but maybe there's a lot more coming that we don't even know about.
So two more questions here. The first, the Hummingbird bot was actually, I thought, really interesting. This analysis, and I think that's fair. And decentralized exchanges are a great ideal, and we're all sort of working towards that. But I think we've also all been somewhat disappointed in the lack of liquidity. You use decentralized exchanges as your primary sort of gateway for asset managers to acquire tokens. How do you go about solving this issue over time, or is it something that you think that will solve itself with bots like this?
I mean, today we heard from 5 different players who are working on solving those issues, and maybe some of the best minds in the space, and each of them are taking very innovative and different approaches, and I know of at least a dozen others that we would have loved to have here as well, time permitting, otherwise it would have been a 1-week conference. But there's tons of people working on that space. There's very few people working on the infrastructure layer, which we've hopefully put in place for the operational, administrative, and regulatory side of finance or asset management. And so I'm pretty convinced that that liquidity will be a thing on DEXs, and might be a year, 2 years, but the issues are clear now, and everyone's working to solve them. They are scalability. They are so speed, they are regulatory issues, and you want to bring in the real institutional players. We just saw in Gotham's presentation this morning that DEXs have less than 0.2% market share of all crypto, it's disappointing. But people, arbitragers and high frequency traders and all that, they will not come in unless, as long as there's the possibility of front running and losing money. So they need the speed. We need to figure out the scalability. We had hoped that scalability would be resolved a year or 2 ago. And now that it's not, there's more and more people jumping in to solve it and help out. So we hope that fixes itself as well. And there was 1 or 2 other issues that people mentioned, but I'm convinced that now there's dozens of teams working on this problem, and that we should stay focused on the operational and administrative side, and pick from the many great solutions I'm sure are going to emerge.
I think that's fair. So, last item, let's talk a little bit more directly about how we think about valuing the token. This is something that's been coming up a lot lately. And so you mentioned the quantity theory of money, so MV equals PQ. There are other sort of drivers of value, like so it'll inflate in the early going and then deflate over time, and so that scarcity ends up being a value driver over time. why do you think specifically the control of velocity, or what we call the velocity problem in crypto? Why do you think that your crypto economic model has effectively solved that?
Okay, so just quickly before I answer that, I want it to be clear, we don't think of MV equals PT or the velocity equation as a valuation equation. And and in fact, it's not, it's an identity.
More of a
it's
value
just,
driver, right?
Well, it's a relationship that always holds, and we see that as it's just fact. The equation always holds, and because we have on-chain transactions, we can measure this equation, the metrics of this equation, better than we've ever been able to, because economic estimates are usually a little bit taken out of the air. A lot of guesses, a lot of proxies, etc. So we do not see it as a valuation metric. What we see is it's a good way to understand the drivers by which drive the purchasing power of the token, or the inverse of that, which is the price level. So going to your other question, it was what do you think is unique about velocity for our token model,
Yeah,
right?
essentially, how are you solving the velocity problem and then driving value in that way?
So the velocity problem has been written about quite extensively, and in general, the velocity problem goes if velocity gets too high or exceeds transaction, then what you end up having is like a downward spiral in the purchasing power of a token. Sometimes confused by price, but it's the purchasing power, and that's that's actually never been proven or never been seen.
Yeah, it's certainly not been predictive.
Yeah, it's not been very predictive, and I don't actually think it's true. What I do think is true, that if you don't have a sink, so remember the equation is MV equals PQ, sorry. It's getting late. So MV equals PQ. So if you've got the Q, or sometimes it's referred to as T, the transaction level going up, people usually say the V has to go up as well. But that's because M in most cases doesn't have a sink. But in our model, there is a sink. So M bringing it down naturally brings the left side of the equation down, which increases the purchasing power of the token on the right side in our case, which is the inverse of P. So that's why I think the model is unique. So by having the sink, or by having the burn, we remove the tokens from circulation, which stops them being recycled. And this dampens the effect of velocity, which, if velocity is in fact a problem, we dampen that effect, and instead we have a direct link to supply, which does directly link the usage of the network to the purchasing power, not necessarily the price of the token.
Cool. So then the last thing I would mention is just, I guess, an observation of my own, where as I start to think more about valuing these networks and what drives value on some of these networks, I think we get tied up in predictive equations and certain compartmentalizations of a previous mental model. But one of the things that I look at today as a very critical value driver behind a network is just the team in charge of it. And the quality of the team just driving value to that network. And when I looked at this network initially, I came to the same conclusion that I come to today, which is this is just an extraordinary executive who's composed a fantastic team, and they've executed on their roadmap in every way. In fact, to my knowledge, Melonport, as it ships mainnet here later this month, will be the first project in the history of our industry to ship mainnet on time.
Don't jinx it. Don't jinx it.
And so as we look at as venture investors, as we look at value, I look at I've actually been picking up MLNs as of late, because if somebody like Mona walked through your door and was raising a seed round at the price that Melon is, you'd be throwing money at it right away. And so I have found it an interesting opportunity to pick up essentially a piece of what a really extraordinary team is working on, and that's sort of a way that I've been seeking value in crypto economics as of late. And so congratulations to everything you guys have done. We're all so proud of you and so grateful for all the work that you guys do in this space.
Thank you, Ryan. Coming from you, that's a great compliment. Thank you.
Do you guys have any questions? I feel like there's got to be a couple. Give you a second. All right.
Yeah, great job, Mona. I know we talked about it a little bit in terms of the sort of economics, but did you consider a sort of staking model where maybe an asset manager had to hold tokens while the fund existed as an alternative to the sort of buy and burn approach? And if you did, why did you?
Yeah, we did consider that for a while. We just thought it was a little bit user unfriendly to impose that on a manager. Having said that, this is not hopefully the last application that gets built on Melon, and other projects that build, on Melon are free to build in staking options. Our old price feed solution had a staking mechanism inbuilt in it, and obviously that that comes with other benefits which link to the value, which link to the purchasing power or the value of the token. But yeah, for our case, I mean, I think we just wanted to keep it simple, clean, user-friendly, and as user-friendly as possible. We didn't want to impose anything unnecessary on a user, because entering the blockchain world is already, it's already like, yeah, a difficult experience for most non-techies.
Is there any other questions? We do have another day tomorrow, so if there are questions, I guess we can talk to you then. I think we should all give ourselves a hand. This was an amazing first day of M1. Thanks for coming.